This photographer helped take the medium from its documentary roots to a legitimate art form. He motivated others to advance the skills, techniques, and ideas that went into crafting thought-provoking images through essays he wrote, galleries he ran, and collectives he was part of. Beyond photography, he and his wife, Georgia O'Keeffe, assisted in the conception and continuation of what modern art would become. This is Insight for Inspiration, Alfred Stieglitz. As a photographer, Stieglitz realized the power of the medium much earlier than many of his contemporaries, who saw the creation of images as merely a tool to objectively record the world around them. The mindset of the time was that photography was primarily meant for documentary and portraiture purposes. The visual language of photography as an art had not been fully realized, which is something Stieglitz would work to change throughout his life. He started photography in the 1880s as a student in Berlin during a time when taking a photo was incredibly difficult and inconvenient because of the size, weight, and complexity of cameras of that era. Throughout the late 1880s and into the next century, Stieglitz photographed many of the same subjects street photographers capture images of today, but did so in a manner that pushed the medium away from what it had been and into something new. His creation of a group of American photographers called Photo-Secession, perfecting of photo printing processes, creation of the Camera Club of New York, and several writings that revolved around how he thought photography could and should evolve, all played a part in the progression of photography from a kind of objective science to a legitimate art form. The Camera Club of New York was created in the late 1890s and still functions to this day. The era it was formed in would result in the first major steps for Stieglitz in his efforts to reframe and elevate photography as an art. He did this through the club's journal, which had been more or less a reference guide to document what had been discussed in meetings up to that point. He looked to enhance this journal through the inclusion of discussions around photography in terms of what was going on in the photographic world at large, to review new processes and consider new instruments and agents as they come into notice. In short, to keep our members in touch with everything connected with the progress and elevation of photography. The new version of this journal would get the name Camera Notes, and ended up being the precursor to future journals Stieglitz would develop. In each issue, it included halftone prints, a few special higher quality prints, and articles about exhibitions that had been held locally and abroad, as well as articles about techniques and technical skills that were being used to create more aesthetically pleasing images. The progress Stieglitz looked to imprint on photography was shown through a retrospective exhibition of his own work at the Camera Club in 1899. This show would also prove to be one of the breaking points for Stieglitz's involvement in the Camera Club, because he included multiple people who were not members of the club to help him with camera notes and putting this exhibition together. Older members of the club felt he was only using it as a stepping stone to raise his own profile and promote his ambitions, in addition to the fact that they felt his views on photography were too progressive. These opposing feelings caused a rift in the Camera Club that eventually led to the resignation of Stieglitz as the editor of Camera Notes and the formation of a new breakaway group called Photo-Secession. In 1902, Photo-Secession was formed. Photo-Secession leaned into the idea of pictorialism as another step towards redefining photography as an art form over the view that it was strictly a form of documentation. Pictorialism saw the camera, photographic negatives, and development techniques as tools that could be wielded much in the same way a painter uses a paintbrush or a sculptor uses a chisel to apply special techniques to craft a vision the person had been wielding in their own mind. The movement focused on the beauty of subject matter, tonality, and composition to express feelings, emotion, and aesthetic value that were already associated with other art forms. This new group was likely inspired by a German group called the Secessionists, who were a body of artists comprising the most advanced and gifted men of their times, who, as the name indicates, have broken away from the narrow rules of custom and tradition, have admitted the claims of the pictorial photograph to be judged on its merits as a work of art independently, and without consideration of the fact that it had been produced through the medium of a camera. Photo-Secession was also influenced by a group formed a few years earlier in the mid-1890s in England called the Linked Ring, who had exhibitions of the work of photographers, all united by the desire to reject the strictly technical approach of much contemporary photography, and only accepting photographs that were created with the full intention of pushing the medium forward in new ways that hadn't been put on display before. Wanted to say thanks to anybody who liked, shared, commented, or subscribed on the last video. You really helped that take off. It's the fastest growing video on the channel so far, and I do appreciate it. If you could like, comment, share, or subscribe on this one, I would appreciate that as well. Now, back to the video. The similar ideas championed by Photo-Secession were promoted through a quarterly photographic journal that was edited and published by Alfred Stieglitz from 1903 to 1917. The text of the first issue opens with an apology, which states, "The time appearing ripe for the publication of an independent American photography magazine devoted largely to the interest of pictorial photography. Camera work makes its appearance as the logical outcome of the evolution of the photographic art. It is proposed to issue quarterly as an illustrated publication which can appeal to the ever-increasing ranks of those who have faith in photography as a medium of individual expression, and, in addition, to make converts of many at present ignorant of its possibilities." Beyond attempting to advance photography as an art form through its views, this quarterly journal also involved techniques that led to higher standards for reproducing photography for wide release. At the time, the halftone printing that was used in newspapers and other printed media was sufficient for the sake of displaying images, but lacked the subtleties to show the true tone and value of printed work needed to convey the artistic techniques and evolution that photographers included in the journal were striving to showcase. To accomplish the sought-after quality, Stieglitz turned to photogravures. Photogravures are a form of intaglio printing, where the area that is going to be printed is carved into an image plate through a series of chemical processes, can more strongly convey the gradient between shades of black and gray. This is a very time-heavy process that can take days to complete in some cases, but it yields very high-quality images, thus setting a new bar for image quality in printed work that has in some way, shape, or form trickled down into the photo books we see today. The Photo-Secession group pushed these ideas until it dissolved over disagreements. They mostly disagreed over the fact of whether or not effects and manipulations of photographs were being taken too far. In some of the members' eyes, this was causing images to be taken into a category that was no longer photography at all. One of the photos Stieglitz took that represented photography's transition into being accepted as an art form was titled "The Steerage." This photo was published in a 1911 issue of Stieglitz's printed journal, Camera Work, in which there are many comparisons and examinations of Stieglitz's photos along with the work of Paul Cézanne, Pablo Picasso, Cubism, and geometry in terms of how these topics relate to photography and other art forms in general. These comparisons largely happened because of the inclusion of Picasso's work at a Photo-Secession's gallery, which was one of the first times American audiences were able to view these paintings. This comparison was also made because Stieglitz loved to share a story about how Picasso himself once made a comparison between this photo and his own work. However, there should not be confusion about why the two were compared. They were compared in regard to the geometric details through the progression of painting and photography as it evolved into something new for both Picasso and Stieglitz, who each looked to carve their own paths in their respective fields, not in terms of considering Stieglitz's photos to have a painterly quality that validated them as art, but that they were art of pure photography, that shared nothing with the brushstrokes and meticulous editing of Stieglitz's past that Photo-Secession was founded upon. The Steerage is considered the first modernist photograph. Modernist photography was a plea for straight photography that involved rejecting the soft focus and painterly quality of pictorialism and encouraging straightforward images of modern life that include clean lines, sharp focus, and repetition of form. The new techniques associated with modernism were at odds with pictorialism and worked to change documentary and street photography by leaning into technological advances in photography and the world at large, as well as through the industry that was rapidly developing at the time. This all coincides to how Stieglitz was changing in regard to his views on photography. With the Photo-Secession, he had thoroughly embraced pictorialism, but in the span of a few years, he had moved on to modernism, to keep in lockstep with progressive artistic and worldviews of the time. Reflecting on the Steerage, Stieglitz claimed that it was another milestone in photography, a step in my own evolution, a spontaneous discovery, because it was intensely direct, not a trace of the handwork of either negative or prints. No diffused focus, just the straight goods. The lens stopped down to 128, but everything simplified in spite of endless detail. In summary, this move from pictorialism to modernism pushed the idea forward that photography could stand on its own, as an art form with its own special techniques, not the idea that it could only be seen as an art if comparative analysis was used to show it as legitimate because of its similarities to other art forms. The next step in elevating photography to the status of art was for Stieglitz to open galleries for Photo-Secession, as a byproduct of his frustration over the fact that there were no dedicated spaces to display photography in New York at the time. The first of these galleries was at 291 Fifth Avenue, which opened in 1905. In the April 1906 issue of Camera Work, Stieglitz explained his reasoning for opening the gallery, stating that before this, with but 2 or 3 exceptions, photographs have not been shown to their best advantage. The crowding of exhibits, the garish, or still worse, insufficient light, the incongruous color scheme, have certainly not helped in affording the public an opportunity to satisfactorily studying pictorial photographs. With these facts in mind, the Secession galleries were arranged so as to permit each individual photograph to be shown to the very best advantage. A photo made by Stieglitz in 1915 in the 291 gallery was a continuation of his growth as a photographer. It was also a sort of rebirth for his photography. Around this time, he was photographing less and promoting modern art more, as well as creating exhibitions for photography. In April 1915, he was inspired to begin photographing out the back window of the 291 gallery during a blizzard that he had to trek 50 blocks to get through in order to take the photos that day. I've done quite some photography recently. It is intensely direct, portraits, buildings from my back window at 291, a whole series of them, a few landscapes and interiors, all interrelated. Speculation is that he was either inspired by Cubist art he was promoting at the time, that he had felt the need to show up the work of up-and-coming photographer Paul Strand, whose work he had recently become infatuated with, or that he was motivated to create this work to meet the challenges presented by that day's weather. Whatever the reason, this began a year-long process of photographing out of the gallery space, and marks another creative era in Stieglitz's life. A little over a decade after the release of the Steerage, Stieglitz would continue to evolve as a photographer by producing another of his career's landmark series titled Equivalents. Stieglitz worked on these 350 photos of clouds from 1923 to 1931. These were an early form of abstract photography that involved modernist techniques that were advanced for the time and consisted of heavy cutting and cropping mixed with odd tilted angles and an absence of subjects from each frame to diminish an understanding of scale. This created disorienting feelings for the viewers, since the photos could be viewed from any orientation without any indication of what the correct orientation was. Stieglitz described these images as an amalgamation of all that he had learned about photography throughout his career to that point. Through clouds, I wanted to put down my philosophy of life, to show that my photographs were not due to subject matter, not to special trees, or faces, or interiors, or special privileges. Clouds were there for everyone. No tax as yet on them. Free. This series was titled Equivalents because they were meant to embody pure emotion rather than representing any particular thing. At the time, his associates were attempting to argue that physical art could elicit emotion in the same way as music. Stieglitz was trying to use this series to convey that message. This is shown through how the titles of these images were names like Music, a sequence of 10 cloud photographs, and Songs of the Sky, but there's speculation over why the series was given this title. In Stieglitz's own words, my cloud photographs are equivalents of my most profound life experiences, my basic philosophy of life. All art is an equivalent of the artist's most profound life experiences. Stieglitz's marriage to painter Georgia O'Keeffe was another aspect of the evolution of photography as an art form that cannot be overlooked. But not only the evolution of photography. The two would help to define the modern art movement as well. Their constant correspondence with one another, over the course of 30 years together resulted in the exchange of over 25,000 pieces of paper that sometimes involved multiple messages a day and other times involved messages that were over 40 pages long. It's through this exchange of letters that their passion for each other and their art grew. O'Keeffe's art was promoted by Stieglitz, which helped her ascend to the point of fame where she has become a household name for artists worldwide. When they met, O'Keeffe was an unknown artist of only 28 years of age, while Stieglitz had already made a name for himself at the age of 52, with many connections in the art world. The two had a relationship that was mutually beneficial. Stieglitz's photography continued to mature through his ample amount of portraits he took of his wife, that eventually totaled over 300 images. O'Keeffe had her art in solo exhibitions that were set up by Stieglitz as he helped to establish her as a central figure in his artistic circles. The art each of them created inspired the other. This continued to advance modern art throughout the time they were together and after Stieglitz's death in 1946. O'Keeffe promoted Stieglitz just as he had promoted her, as she worked to preserve his legacy after he passed away. The art she would continue to create after 1946, along with the legacy she established for her husband, helped to define modern art throughout the rest of the century. It is not art in the professionalized sense about which I care, but that which is created sacredly, as a result of a deep inner experience with all of oneself, and that becomes art in time. Thanks for watching. Until next time, keep developing.